Hello, everyone. It is Joe from the Strange Voyage Files. It is July 14th, 2025, and I am attempting to answer a very, very important question. When Ozzy was fired, or when he left, should Black Sabbath have changed their name? Now, this really doesn't come up when Ozzy did quit the band before Never Say Die, but it does come up after he gets fired and Dio takes over. And it really becomes a thing. Now, this had been discussed for a while, and then that kind of gravitates to as original members leave, as Geezer leaves and as Bill leaves, should Tony have kept the band Black Sabbath? And that argument is introduced. Before I go any further, I just want to say I love this shirt. Found it on eBay at one point. Ozzy and Randy and Bob and Don and Lee and Don. Because Don Airey was extraordinarily important to Blizzard of Oz. And it's a crime that he was not on Diary of Madman. Johnny Cook did a great job, don't get me wrong. But we would have loved to have had Don actually on Diary of Madman. Love this shirt. Because Blizzard of Oz was a band. Any rate, so the only other band I can think of where it has been, where this should the band name have changed with a singer or somebody of importance leaving, is Van Halen. And I think a lot of that comes from Van Hagar. That popped up right after Dave quit Van Halen. And I think if Sammy's last name was Bogart, we wouldn't have had this discussion of should they have changed the name to, Van Bogart or Van, whatever it may have been, especially Van Halen, because you have the two brothers that were in the band. But that's the only other band where I can really think that it has been argued that the band's name should have changed. You look at Aerosmith when Perry and Whitford leave, and they're very, no, it's not Steven Tyler, but still, Joe Perry and Brad Whitford are very important members of that band. Nobody ever said Aerosmith should change their name. Vince either gets fired or quits Motley Crue. Nobody ever says Motley Crue should have changed their name. Journey. Steve Perry leaves Journey. You have several singers after Steve Perry. Nobody ever says Journey should have changed his name. But this argument has been going on with Black Sabbath for a long, long time. Now, it has really taken root when the ownership of Black Sabbath was split between Tony and Ozzy and Sharon! Ozzy! Sharon, the evil, money-loving troll, basically said, it is not Black Sabbath. You cannot use Black Sabbath unless the name Black Sabbath, unless it's the four original members. And Bill's not there. That's okay. There are two times I love Tony Iommi. I think he is the ultimate. Two times where I have no respect for Tony Iommi. First one, and I'll get into great detail in a minute, is when he was too much of a chicken to fire Ozzy himself, and he made Bill do it. And the second time was when he was too greedy and too much of a chicken to stand up to Sharon, and Bill was not in the 13 album or tour. But let's go back to this. Let's talk about how this all comes about. Because I think Ozzy's move is the one that kind of dictates the answer to this question. Ozzy quit Sabbath after Technical Ecstasy. He doesn't like the album. Doesn't like the direction it's going. He doesn't like that they're spending months in the studio, that Tony is, trying to be this god, every little note has to be perfect, which I'll side with Ozzy on that. That had to have been insane. But this chair, I'm telling you, one day I'm going to fall back. So Ozzy quits. And, Sabbath gets, whatever the guy's name was, it was in the band for 3 seconds, that sang a version of Junior's Eyes, who is from Birmingham. and that doesn't go well. Ozzy's going absolutely nowhere, so he comes crawling back, and they kind of, reluctantly say, "Yeah, I guess we really need you back." And then you guys know the story. Never Say Die comes out. The tour, the tour does well. Black Sabbath always tours well with Ozzy, but Van Halen is, they blow him off the stage. They really do, and that's when Tony Iommi probably woke up and said, we can't continue going in the direction we're going, and Ozzy's the biggest liability. Bill, fire him, because Tony didn't have the backbone to do it. Now, this is where it all starts, because even back then, and the story has changed, that because the Ardens are involved on both sides of this, that I have heard over the years that it was Ozzy's new band, the Blizzard of Oz, that they wanted to call Son of Sabbath. And I've also heard that Black Sabbath with Ronnie Dio, they wanted to call Son of Sabbath. So, as with anything having to do with Ozzy and whatnot, stories change. But that idea was thrown out that one of them would have been Son of Sabbath. I think it was always more Ozzy's band. And then they were going to tour, they wanted them to tour together, and Ozzy would sing a few songs with Sabbath at the end of the night and whatnot. And that was never going to happen. But this does not materialize with Sharon taking 50% of the Black Sabbath name. This goes that far back. Should they still have been Black Sabbath? And if you read Iron Man, Tony's book, I Am Iron Man, which is phenomenal, they had no intention of changing the name of Black Sabbath. Even when Geezer, and people forget, Geezer left the band after Never Say Die too. And so it's really just Tony and Bill, but they're going to continue on, and it was important to show that it still was Black Sabbath to get Geezer back. So they really wanted to have Geezer back, and he does come back and re-records a lot of what Jeff Nichols does on Heaven and Hell, because Jeff Nichols originally plays bass. And so this is kind of where it starts. Should Black Sabbath have changed their name? Should Black Sabbath have changed their name? And Ozzy is continuously saying in the press, it's not Black Sabbath. It's not Black Sabbath. It's not Black Sabbath. It's not Black Sabbath. He's so mad, which makes no sense to me, because he walked out. And in my opinion, when you walk out, even though he came back out of necessity. He didn't come back because he missed his friends. He didn't come back because he said, I made a terrible decision. Came back because nobody really wanted to work with him. He got very lucky. Really the right place at the right time, because when he forms the Blizzard of Oz, he ends up, I believe he runs into Bob Daisley in a pub. Randy, things aren't going well for Quiet Riot. And truthfully, if it would have been 6 months earlier, Randy would not have wanted to leave Quiet Riot. So it was really a lot of timing that worked very well for Ozzy. Even getting Lee Kerslake, even though he wanted Tommy Aldridge, great drummer and a class act guy, as far as I know, does not write. Lee Kerslake does. He only has one writing credit on Blizzard, but he has almost all writing credits on Diary. So, things, a lot of right place at the right time for that second run for Ozzy that forms the Blizzard of Oz band. But the first time, nobody wants to work with him, because he's known as this, the madman, but he's known as a junkie. And he's known as unreliable, and he's known for disappearing, and so nobody wants to work with him. So he goes back out of necessity, and it doesn't work with, God, what's that guy's name? God, what the heck was that? I feel bad. Dave Walker. Said it in the last video. Sucks to get old. Dave Walker fills in, and that doesn't work out well. So fast forward, and now we have Black Sabbath with Dio. My opinion, I don't see a reason why they would have changed the name. You still had three original members. It still sounded very much like Black Sabbath, with the exception of Dio can write. And Dio can write music, not just lyrics. He can write music, he can write melodies, and he's very good at it when he's writing with the right person. I've talked about this a little bit before. Dio is a very good songwriter in conjunction with somebody. Now, yes, there are a lot of great Dio solo songs on the Dio stuff. Like Holy Diver, he has the only credit. Although Jake Lee will tell you that he, when he was in the band for a short time, that he came up with the riff and the foundation of Holy Diver. But for the most part, Dio's writing is usually best when it's working with other strong writers. So it's still Black Sabbath. If you put this album on without vocals and it was just an instrumental album and you said, guess the band, in probably in one of three tries in 1980, you're going to say Black Sabbath. I don't think anyone's going to say it was Aerosmith. I don't think anyone's going to say it was Van Halen. I don't think anybody was going to say it was Supertramp. It sounded like a Black Sabbath album. So, no, I don't think that Black Sabbath should have changed their name. And again, this is strange that this was so much just a Black Sabbath thing. Then you fast forward to the the reuniting with the original members, and where a lot of the litigation that goes on, and the final understanding that Black Sabbath will be owned by Tony Iommi and Ozzy. When you say Ozzy, it's Sharon. And Black Sabbath can't be Black Sabbath unless it's the four guys. So we get Heaven and Hell, which works because, in the first album is The Devil You Know, which is a joke. It's a middle finger to Sharon. And, and it's, everybody gets the joke. Everybody laughs at the joke because it's Black Sabbath. And everybody says this is a Black Sabbath album. Sharon, you're a you-know-what. God, I hate that woman. Insert your own comment there. So, the fact that the last Sabbath album with Dio had to go under this moniker of Heaven and Hell is absolutely stupid and ridiculous. Now, I will agree with Tony that Seventh Star should have been a solo album because it sounded very, very different. Good album, not a great album, average to good album, but that should have been a Tony Iommi a record. Now, going forward, that's where the $5 billion question comes in. Should the Tony Martin era have been called Black Sabbath? I can see both sides of the coin. At this point, Tony Iommi, the name is not going to push as many units as the name Black Sabbath. However, a lot of people love these albums, and I love Headless Cross, and I like Tear. Cross Purposes, I think, is absolute garbage. Forbidden is okay, and Eternal Idol is bad. Should those albums, and you can even kind of throw Born Again in, but again, you had three original members on Born Again, so we'll take Born Again out. Should those Tony Martin era albums, should they have been known as Black Sabbath? If there's a time that I think they should have changed the name, maybe even just to be a Tony Iommi solo project, it would have been then. Because you have Tony's riffs are undeniable and they are always Sabbath. But this is a completely different band at this point. So, but again, we're living in an age where, especially with touring bands today, where you only have one original member, or you don't even have any original members. Again, this was never brought up when Ace and Peter left Kiss. I don't ever, and again, I was really young. But I don't remember anybody saying Kiss needs to change their name. And again, I said Journey when, yeah, I did when Steve Perry left. Wasn't even thought of. So I will say that I would stick with whatever Tony Iommi wanted to do, because Tony Iommi was the one that kept Sabbath going. I could have lived with, when we get to the Tony Martin era, I could have lived with either one. If they wanted to rename it or if they stayed Black Sabbath as they did, fine with either one. The only thing that where I think that does not work in their favor is that, and this back to the beginning proves this, because everything except for the Ozzy stuff was eliminated. Thank God, so was everything from 13 at that concert. In the long run, and I'm not talking in our lifetime, I'm talking when we're all dead. 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, 1,000,000 years from now, whatever it may be. Is the Tony Martin stuff going to really be remembered as Black Sabbath? Is Born Again. And again, I know people love Born Again. I don't really like it all that much. Not a big fan of Born Again. Obviously, the Ozzy stuff will, and the Dio stuff will. That's just, it's just going to. In a long run, I love history. I love studying history. I love it. So looking at it from a historical standpoint, maybe they should have changed the name to something else. But again, Tony was the only one that stuck with the band. He decided to keep it Black Sabbath. So that is, with the exception of Seventh Star, he wanted that to be a solo album. So that it is what it is. So I guess I will say, no, they shouldn't, and nobody else changed the name of the band. Nobody of any real major consequence. So no, I don't think they should have changed the name. I think they should have stayed with Black Sabbath. But let me know what you think, because there are a lot of people who do say, hey, without Ozzy, and I've heard both sides of the coin. And I was an Ozzy purist for a long time. It was not Black Sabbath without Ozzy. They should have changed the name. It's not Sabbath. It's not Sabbath. I obviously don't feel that way anymore. So there are people like I was who are, it's only Sabbath with those four guys. And then you have people on this other side of the coin that say it's a very similar band, but man, Dio brought a better voice, which he did. He brought a much better voice. He's a much better singer than Ozzy. It's not a knock on Ozzy's time in Sabbath by any means, because those albums, with the exception of 13, and a couple songs on Never Say Die, all those albums are perfect. But Dio brought something different to the band. So people say they should have changed the band because it was musically, it was different musically. Dio changed the band musically. So, it is what it is. But what do you think? This is an age-old argument. Do you think Sabbath should have changed their name when Ozzy left? Or, as it is, they should have stayed Sabbath? And I think it's just stupid that we had one dumb album called The Devil You Know. Under the moniker Heaven and Hell. That should have been Black Sabbath. At that point in time, they could have written a check to Sharon, which I'm sure she got something. Oh, maybe not, because it really was. And maybe that was another big part of the reason why they did Heaven and Hell. Because, Dio was not going to... So I take back what I just said, because Dio would not have given a cent to Ozzy. So maybe that was the only way not to make sure that... Ozzy, I need my money, Ozzy! Didn't get any money. All right, so like, subscribe, all that stuff, and let me know what you think in the comments. See you later.